Hello, I'm Richard Dagenet. This is number 0831, the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder, and it comes to you right now.
The following program is brought to you in living color.
Now, it's time for an eclectic mix of interviews and some of the oddest news stories you'll ever hear. It's the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder.
Hey there, hi there, ho there! Peter Anthony Holder here with you, and yes, this is indeed another edition of the Stuff File program, number 0831. And coming up on this edition of the Stuff File program, you'll meet Douglas Smith, who is the author of The Path of Rocks and Thorns, Leadership Lessons from a Prison Cell. He shares his story of mental illness and incarceration.
You know, my story is a little bit different. Before I ever went to prison, I had already achieved my master's degree in social work. You know, I was just someone who always wanted to change the world. And what stood in my way was a co-occurring mental illness and substance use challenge. You know, I ultimately went to the streets for street drugs, and the streets led me right to prison. What I did find was an ability to just be with myself with no demands, none of the demands that I felt upon me.
Dean Tolson is a former NBA player and the author of Power Forward, which shares his story of illiteracy into adulthood and how he turned that around.
I realized at 32 years old that I couldn't read and write, and that sports and athletics was not the answer to my entire life and future. I realized that getting an education was the answer and that knowledge is king.
Marc Hartzman, the curator of WeirdHistorian.com, with the weird story for the month of July. This one deals with a wire walker who crossed Niagara River for the second time in 1893.
A 3/4-inch steel cable, 200 feet above the rushing rapids below. This was his second attempt on October 12, 1892, when he was just 22 years old. He crossed, and at this point, he amazed the crowds. He did it in about 6 minutes, which was the fastest time at that point. He was the 8th person to do it, so this was the fastest by then. He didn't just cross it. He would also, as he went back and forth, he'd go back once or twice, and he'd lay on the wire, he'd sit in a chair, he would unfold the newspaper to read it. He'd swing himself over the rope and dangle from his toes. So he was really like an amazing daredevil.
And there's lots and lots of Stuff File news, dad joke theater, morning shower thoughts, and of course, an idiot of the day. The guests later. The person who told you this was show number 0831 was Richard Dagenet, who is a broadcaster, a former colleague, and the author of a series of rhyming children's books. His latest one is called Claire the Bear. He was also a guest on show number 0828, so you can go back and check that one out and listen to it all over again. Thank you very much, Richard, for doing the guest slate on this edition of the Stuff File program, a show that is listener-supported, fan-funded radio that depends on you for our success. Join us at patreon.com to help make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. Well, let's get right to the stuff. A California woman's home has been inundated with unwanted Amazon packages over the past year. The San Jose resident, who wished to remain anonymous, reports receiving numerous boxes containing seat covers for cars from the brand Etkin, which is sold by a Chinese vendor. Apparently, the woman's address was listed as the company's return address. Reviews of the seat covers cite issues with fit, high return costs, and failure to receive refunds. As one resident noted, oftentimes what it costs to return it is about more than 50% of what they paid for it. Despite Amazon assurances to resolve the matter, the packages continued arriving.
Amazon Shipping has the technology and transportation network to move your business forward. Sell on your channels, deliver with ours.
The company has since visited the home to collect the unwanted deliveries and take steps to permanently address the problem. This incident mirrors similar cases of brushing scams where sellers send packages to random addresses to boost numbers.
Free same-day delivery. Free delivery on fresh groceries and access to movies and TV shows. It's on Amazon Prime.
Just beware. Even though Amazon owns up to situations like this and does their due diligence, you still have to follow the old adage of buyer beware. On July 5th, a family from Paris left on holiday headed for Morocco. But during a 4:30 a.m. gas station stop, the 62-year-old man drove off without his wife and didn't realize it until about 190 miles later. The unnamed Parisian called emergency services but couldn't remember which gas station he had stopped at. The couple's 22-year-old daughter couldn't help, as she had been sleeping the whole time. Fortunately, by tracking her phone, police were able to locate the woman, who hadn't left the gas station since being abandoned. They were reunited and continued on their trip with a good story to tell. Is it really a good story to tell? Or was she silently giving her husband side-eye for the rest of the trip? Yeah. After Tricia Lawson of St. Louis rear-ended a pickup truck on July the 8th, she allegedly told Spring Township, Pennsylvania police that she was, quote, listening to the voice of God, unquote. Lawson was driving her Mazda sedan in Pleasant Gap at 100 miles per hour when she hit the truck, which sent it crashing into the front of a local smoke shop. Lawson had reportedly also hit multiple other vehicles before the truck. She was charged with accidents involving occupied vehicles or structures and drug-related charges, and bail was set at $25,000. Wow. Traveling at 100 miles an hour when she hit a truck? Was she just listening to God, or in a hurry to meet him? And finally, in this section of Stuff File News, before we get to our first guest here on this edition of the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder, it's time once again for the Mayor Larry Vaughn Bad Judgment in Leadership Award.
Now, if you fellas are concerned about the beaches, you do whatever you have to make them safe. But those beaches will be open for this weekend.
15-year-old Max McKinney of Spooner, Wisconsin, thought he was working hard and doing the right thing when he built a charming fishing bait stand on his family's farmland. You know, sort of like a country version of a lemonade stand. From the wooden 6-by-15-foot shed, McKinney sold bait, sodas, and candy to anglers headed to Spooner Lake nearby. But Washburn County zoning officials shut him down after the second weekend of sales with a cease and desist order. McKinney's grandpa, Tom Foss, gave him his blessing to build a stand, saying, "We encourage Max. My grandson is the kind of kid this country needs more of." He went on to say, "Who threatens a 15-year-old selling ice cream, worms, and T-shirts? The answer is bullies and bureaucrats." Meanwhile, the 15-year-old has 3 other jobs. He said, "I want to be a doctor in the future, and I'm willing to work hard and save money any way I can." County Zoning Administrator Dale Beers said no officials visited the stand or spoke with McKinney before or after the violation was issued. Beers said age does not matter to our ordinances. Foss filed a formal complaint in person but said officials were defensive right away. Their response was, "Our decision is final." Foss said people should be disgusted by this because it doesn't pass the smell test. Well said for a person who deals with bait. And that is why the Washburn County zoning officials have earned the Mayor Larry Vaughn Bad Judgment in Leadership Award.
Let's be reasonable, huh? This is not the time or the place to perform some kind of a half-assed autopsy on a fish.
And let's get to our first guest here in this edition of the Stuff File program, shall we? Douglas Smith has journeyed along the rocky road of life from trauma, addiction, incarceration, and recovery. He is now helping others by chronicling his story in the book, The Path of Rocks and Thorns, Leadership Lessons from a Prison Cell. Douglas joins us via Zoom from Texas. Hi, Douglas.
Hi, Peter. How are you?
Just tickety-boo. Thanks very much for being on the program with us. Right off the bat, I'm going to ask a social question. Prisons are supposedly places of rehabilitation, but are often not. So, in your estimation, what are prisons doing wrong? And also, how did you not become a statistic yourself and come out the other side?
Two big questions. Prisons are inherently there too as a consequence, right? I think it's just important to get it straight that they're there not for a rehabilitative purpose. They're there to house people who have been convicted of crimes. That isn't to say that they don't have rehabilitative programming in it. They absolutely have. A lot of them have vocational training, on the job training experiences. Sometimes they have cognitive behavioral programs, and a lot of them do have rehabilitative services available to them. In Texas, that usually happens after a parole vote, meaning that you've served most of your sentence and then the parole board votes for you to get into some type of rehabilitative program. So yes, the prisons are there as a form of punishment, a consequence, but there are investments in reentry in there. My story is a little bit different. Before I ever went to prison, I had already achieved my master's degree in social work. I was just someone who always wanted to change the world. And what stood in my way was a co-occurring mental illness and substance use challenge. I ultimately went to the streets for street drugs, and the streets led me right to prison. So in prison, a lot of the programming I really was just not of much consequence to me. What I did find was an ability to just be with myself with no demands, none of the demands that I felt upon me, the demands of fitting in, of being perfect, all of those things went away. It allowed me to just get to know myself in a way that I never had before, just free from the incessant demands on my own brain. I think a lot of people would recognize. So, getting out of prison, I think I just kind of carried that with me. I just didn't want to return to that place of feeling imperfect and good enough. Just realized this every single day is a gift, and I was going to live each day as a gift to my soul. And, from prison on, I learned to become a leader, elevated, really learning to invest in people, not caring about my own success and just allowing success to unfold really as an investment in others. So I don't know if that answers your question. It's a pretty sweeping question, and I'd love to dive in even further.
Well, it's interesting in that it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like you were dealing with the anxiety of social demands, which led you to certain situations that led to your incarceration. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, I was trying to change how I felt. I felt near constant anxiety. A lot of people use the term imposter syndrome. I don't know what I think about that term. What I was feeling was constant anxiety, like never good enough. I was afraid of what people thought of me. I was afraid that people might find me out, that I just wasn't who I said I was. And I just was desperately afraid that people would find out who I truly was. And those feelings felt absolutely intolerable. So like a lot of people, I used alcohol to numb it. Then that didn't work. So I went to prescription drugs. That didn't work. And then I ultimately went out on the streets and found drugs that would ultimately lead me to prison. So I tried to escape how I feel. In prison, I could not escape how I felt. Like, you just can't escape it. You have to experience every single emotion, whether it's rage, fear, anxiety, what have you. And even today, I don't know another way to healing and to wisdom except going through your emotions. You have to feel them. That's the metaphor of my book. I structure it as in the way that similar to Dante's Inferno. In Dante's Inferno, Dante goes all the way through to the deepest core of hell before he can climb again. That's what it's like. The route to healing is to actually learn to feel. And when you do that, you realize, oh, wait, this feelings change, they shift, they're kind of magic.
Well, I've often said the most important word in saying when people go through hell is the word through.
That's exactly it. You go through. Yeah.
So, again, I'm just wondering, now that you've written this book, The Path of Rocks and Thorns, and you're trying to teach people from some of the lessons you learned literally the hard way, I'm assuming that whatever problems you were having back in the day would have been compounded in today's world with social media.
Oh my goodness. The comparison to others would have been utterly debilitating to me, right? It's hell, and I can hardly imagine what it's like to be new in your career these days and looking at LinkedIn and Facebook and feeling that constant comparison to other people. Yes, I have compassion for people coming into their careers during the age of social media.
So how do you go about teaching the people of today's generation the pitfalls that you have gone through when, quite frankly, there are more pitfalls available to them?
Well, my practice, I do leadership development. I am a social worker. I focus on developing leaders among people who have lived experience of anxiety, trauma, incarceration, depression, mental illness. That is the heart and soul of my practice. And, one of the things we do is that we look at all emotion as wisdom. We don't try to hide from it. I'm not trying to talk people out of how they feel. In fact, one of the things I ask people to do is sit with the emotions that they feel, the anxieties, and just sit with them, watch them, learn from them, see where they show up in their bodies. And I eventually would get to the point where I can ask the person, so what does that emotion need? Where does it come from? Invariably, people find wisdom on the other end of it. They learn what their true motivations are. Sometimes people do the comparison thing. They're doing it for a reason because it's driving their success. Sometimes that anxiety of comparison is actually signaling areas where you need to grow. So we don't escape our emotions. We go through it and listen to what they actually need.
Do you often feel like you could wave a magic wand and erase some of the past traumas that you've had? Or do you believe that those past traumas make you the whole complete person that you are right now?
Absolutely. Someone once asked me, what would I tell my younger self? And I thought about it for about 2.5 seconds. And I said, I would tell you that you and I are exactly the same. You just don't know it yet.
Well, it's funny because, that's one of the questions I rarely ask of people. And if it were asked of me, the question would be absolutely nothing, because I happen to like who I am right now. And early me has to go through everything they went through to get to me right now. So I would change nothing.
Absolutely. I also would change nothing. I mean, if I could go in and take away the pain and the terror that I caused people through my criminal actions, I would absolutely do it. Would I change the journey of trauma recovery, going through prison? Absolutely not. I would change none of that. I just wish I could take the pain I caused away from others.
Who exactly are you trying to reach with your book, The Path of Rocks and Thorns?
I think it's anyone who has been through a challenge in life, that they've experienced failure, that they feel the voice in their head telling them that they're not good enough. I think anyone who is looking to get past sort of the more superficial type of leadership books and find something of real depth where someone will talk honestly and sometimes even brutally about mental illness, about flirting with suicide, and how that journey actually helps the leader inside of you to emerge. And so it's not something to necessarily run from. It's something to see as a strength in your leadership. The things you go through, the loss of jobs, the addictions, things of that nature also can serve as springboards to a genuine form of leadership.
It sounds like a very, very interesting book, and one that's introspective and informative for all people who read it. And the one question I want to ask is, how old does somebody have to be to read this book? Because I could think of it being, for instance, in high school.
Oh, yeah. I think normalizing emotions. Some of the things I talk about pertain to childhood trauma, about flirting with suicide as a 14-year-old. I think other 14-year-olds reading that will realize that they are absolutely not alone, that while it is extraordinarily painful, it is not abnormal what you're going through. And that, there is a route to healing and to growth that you might realize for yourself without having to have to go through. It took me to about age 45 before I start to really become myself again. And maybe someone younger reading this might find that route sooner.
I mentioned earlier some of the toxicity of social media out there. What is your social media presence, and what are you doing to try and stem the tide of what is actually going on out there?
I try to be genuine and authentic in everything that I put up onto LinkedIn. I try to normalize what people are feeling, to give people hope. I've put out some Instagram posts where I'm really honest about my emotions and normalizing emotions for other people. I would hope that when people find me on social media, what they find is a breath of fresh air, people really speaking to authentic emotions that they might be feeling. I try to be provocative, challenge notions. Like I put out a post recently that said, imposter syndrome isn't real, prove me wrong. And it was intended to be provocative and invite people to feel their emotions without diagnosing them. But it's a fun way to get people to grapple with the stories that they tell themselves. So that's what you'd find on my social media. I was in public policy for years of my life, working to end mass incarceration, working around the Texas legislature. I've learned that, I'm not using my social media always as an advocacy tool. I want to use it as a way to invite people into real and authentic conversation, right? To drop partisanship.
Well, the book, again, is The Path of Rocks and Thorns, Leadership Lessons from a Prison Cell. Douglas, thank you very, very much for taking the time to be on the program with us.
Peter, thank you so much for having me.
Douglas Smith, author of The Path of Rocks and Thorns, Leadership Lessons from a Prison Cell. You can go to our website at thestufffile.com, check out the show number for this program, which is show number 0831, and you'll find the link to Douglas's website, plus links to either Amazon.com or Amazon.ca, where you can order his book directly. You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder.
And now, Dad Joke Theater.
What did the mommy broom say to the baby broom? Time to go to sweep.
Join us again for another Stuff File program, Dad Joke Theater.
There's still more guests, more news, and an idiot of the day coming your way on the Stuff File program. Stay tuned. The Stuff File program is a listener-supported, fan-funded radio show that depends on you for our success. Join us at patreon.com to help make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. Sign up and find out about our rewards program. Being a patron doesn't have to be a long-term commitment. There's absolutely no obligation. You could join today and end whenever you'd like. But the time we have your support would be so greatly appreciated. We'd also love to hear your thoughts about the show and even your ideas for rewards. Join us for the ride. Join us at patreon.com/TheStuffFile program.
I'm standing with a definite goal. For Canada. Hi, this is Chris Cuthbert. When I'm calling a game, even with a gold medal on the line, it's my duty to be impartial. But I have no trouble taking sides for Canada when it means protecting Canadian jobs and supporting Canadian businesses. The right call is to buy Canadian. Shop as if your country depends on it. Keep your money in Canada for Canada.
Coming to you from the outskirts of sanity, this is the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder.
And still to come on the program, we'll talk to Dean Tolson, who was a former NBA player and the author of Power Forward. Marc Hartzman, the curator of WeirdHistorian.com, is in with the weird story for the month of July. We do indeed have a morning shower thought and, of course, an idiot of the day coming your way a little later on. But right now we have much more in Stuff File news. Patrick Winslow of Big Torch Key, Florida, celebrated his 57th birthday on July the 4th in style. Around 11:30 a.m., Winslow drove to the Conch Tour train depot in Key West and left his car running with rock music blaring from the radio. He told employees there that he used to work for the company and asked for a tour of the train. But then he got into one of the tourist trains and took off, picking up bystanders along the way, and employees were confused, thinking maybe he had permission to drive the train. They were able to track Winslow with GPS. Police found him at the southernmost point buoy, where they said he exhibited rapid speech and appeared excited. Well, it was his birthday. Winslow said he just borrowed the train because it was his birthday. Then they found a methamphetamine pipe in his pocket and charged him with burglary, grand theft auto, and possession of drug paraphernalia. He was held on $60,000 bond. Gee, I hope everybody at the jail sang him happy birthday. Why did the chicken cross the road?
Why did the chicken cross the road?
To get to the other side.
Well, this chicken didn't. In Key West, Florida, a woman named Cynthia Sosa reportedly stopped at an intersection to let a chicken cross the road. When another driver honked at her and ran over the chicken, Sosa allegedly pursued the driver out of frustration. She blocked the road, attempted to open the driver's door, and sprayed bear mace directly at the victim's face. Sosa then fled the scene but was later arrested and charged with 2 counts of aggravated battery and 1 count of burglary with assault or battery. You know, irony would be that when she gets to prison, she's on a diet that consists of nothing but poultry. Yeah. A juvenile Ceratosaurus fossil was sold for $30.5 million at Sotheby's, far exceeding its estimated value of $4 to $6 million. The 6-minute bidding war attracted 6 participants, with the winning buyer remaining undisclosed. This rare find, one of only 4 Ceratosaurus skeletons ever discovered, was unearthed in Wyoming in 1996. Measuring over 6 feet tall and nearly 11 feet long, the fossil boasts a remarkably intact skull, contributing to its high price. In case you're not up on your dinosaurs and you don't know what a Ceratosaurus is...
Ceratosaurus, a large predatory theropod dinosaur from the late Jurassic period. A horned biped, it moved on powerful hind legs while its arms were reduced in size.
Thank you very much, movie Jurassic World. Anyway, the sale, part of Sotheby's Geek Week event, is the 3rd highest amount ever paid for a fossil at auction, sparking renewed interest in the fossil market despite concerns from some paleontologists about accessibility and preservation of such valuable specimens. Well, there is only one fossil that I would be interested in collecting from that period.
Dino, fetch the bone!
And finally, in this section of Stuff File News, and still with auctions before we get to our next guest here on this edition of the Stuff File program, the iconic Rosebud sled from Orson Welles' 1941 film Citizen Kane was recently auctioned for $14.75 million, marking it as the 2nd most expensive piece of movie memorabilia ever sold.
Rosebud.
Actually, I just realized that for that one person who hasn't seen Citizen Kane yet, I should have yelled, "Spoiler alert!" Yeah, anyway. The sled, one of only 3 to still exist, was in the possession of Gremlins director Joe Dante since he discovered it at the old RKO Pictures studio lot back in 1984.
You could have found out what that rosebud meant. I bet that would have explained everything.
No, I don't think so. No.
Dante decided to put the sled up for sale through Heritage Auctions, where it fetched an impressive sum of $14.75 million. This sale places the sled as the second highest ever paid for a piece of movie memorabilia, following the $32.5 million auction of the ruby slippers from The Wizard of Oz just last year in 2024. Dante expressed his satisfaction in seeing Rosebud find a new home, emphasizing the enduring power of storytelling.
Mr. Kane was a man who got everything he wanted and then lost it. Maybe Rosebud was something he couldn't get or something he lost. Anyway, it wouldn't have explained anything.
But he could have had it back for just under $15 million. Anyway, let's get to our next guest here on this edition of the Stuff File program, shall we? Dean Tolson is a former NBA player who was a member of the Seattle Sonics in the 1970s. He was the all-time rebounder at the University of Arkansas, but he did all of that while being functionally illiterate. However, today, his greatest achievement was earning a master's degree, magna cum laude, and now devotes his life to reach at-risk youth and adults about the power of education. He's the author of the book, Power Forward, which is the story of his experiences on the court and in the classroom. Dean joins us via Zoom from Scottsdale, Arizona. Hi, Dean.
Hello, Peter, and good morning, and thank you for having me on your show to visit with all your listeners and audiences out there.
Thank you very much. So I want to go back to when you were in the University of Arkansas. You know, I often hear these stories about people who are functionally illiterate, yet they go to school and they just seem to get by. How was it that you were in university? And I'm guessing part of it was your basketball prowess was vital to the team, but how did you get through university without being literate?
In short, they cheated for me.
Wow.
All the way through.
So I guess it was one of those situations where you were more vital to them on the basketball court than you were in the classroom.
That's correct. You know, my first year there, I averaged 30 points a game and 20 rebounds a game.
So you went to the NBA. You, as I said, you played with the Seattle Sonics. And when your playing days were over, you decided that you wanted to go back to school and actually learn the things that you had missed through school up until that point. What was the decision process for you to go back to school in the first place?
I realized at 32 years old that I couldn't read and write, and that sports and athletics was not the answer to my entire life and future. I realized that getting an education was the answer and that knowledge is king.
Is it because of the situation where back in the day when you were playing in the NBA, players weren't becoming overnight millionaires? And I'm just wondering if you were in that situation today, would you still go through the same process of going to school after you finished your basketball career?
Players were getting millions back then. The highest paid player on my team, by the name of Spencer Haywood, was getting $6 million in 1974. So they were millionaires. I had the dream of achieving that as a little boy, and politically, it never panned out for me. This is the story that you're covering right now.
Okay, so going back to school was an important factor in your life, but also, I mean, you have your book out called Power Forward. You decided not only to help yourself, but to help others. What was that process like?
I decided I'm going to do God's work. He called me to reach youth in the community, in the country, and around the world. Everybody on this planet deserves a real opportunity to be part of the inclusion of the financial process and getting themselves in a quality education, raising themselves and their families and their friends in the community, and make a conscious contribution of their choosing in society.
When did you first write your book, Power Forward?
I wrote it 10 years, it took me 10 years to write that book because I wrote it one word at a time. I'm not a writer.
And why did you feel it was important to get that story out, besides the work that you had already done with reaching at-risk youth and adults?
Because this system has programmed education to teach kids what they want them to know instead of what they truly should be knowing about themselves, their history, and the knowledge of achieving and getting a real education like I finally did at 36 years old and then a master's at 57.
So when you work with, again, at-risk youth and adults, do you initially see yourself as you were back then in the eyes of the people you're working with now? And what, if so, what does that feel like for you?
I see myself as the messenger of this message because I am the first person in history to go from illiteracy to a master's degree and graduate magna cum laude in a Division I university in the United States of America. No person has ever done that.
I would assume, just by the fact that you succeeded in team sports, that you are the kind of guy, because team sports does that and brings it out in people, the kind of guy that is, shall we say, confident in their sporting abilities and skills. Yet I'm just wondering, when it came to your illiteracy, did you ever feel sorry for yourself or down on yourself because you couldn't read?
Cried every night and prayed every night for 4 years in my undergraduate degree and asked God for the strength to touch my mind and my brain and overcome all the tragedies that had been done to me and forgive society for that so I could move on. If you don't forgive, you can't move on in any endeavor.
Do you feel that if you had a Dean Tolson in your life early on, that you could be the example that you could possibly be for children like yourself, as opposed to not having that example when you were in that situation?
Black history in this country, as we speak, and real live Dean Tolson stories are frowned upon. This message should be in every home of America for anybody, all kids alike, Black, white, Jews, Gentiles, Protestants, Lutheran, people, anybody that wants to learn and achieve an education and give back to society in their own way of their choosing. That's what I'm doing.
You say that your story is, and the story of others like you, is frowned upon within society. Why do you think that is?
It's politicized. That's why I went back to school, to prove that anyone can do what I did. I got the political chance to overcome being politicized in my entire career. Who averages 30 rebounds a game and you didn't see it? Or average 30 points a game and you didn't see that? Everyone saw it. That's how I got to the NBA, right?
Right.
So when I got there, why didn't somebody see it and allow me to be part of inclusion and earn my living and make money? I had to go back to prove what we're discussing right now.
When you finally went to school, actually, let's talk about when you finally ended your NBA career. Sometimes we don't hear a lot of people what they go through and what they do when their playing days comes to an end. In your case, you went and got a master's degree. But beyond getting the master's degree and to getting the education, what did you do for a living after your playing days?
I ran a carpet and upholstery cleaning company in Tacoma, Washington for 20 years. I retired from running that company and re-enrolled at the University of Arkansas at 53 years old and graduated at 57 with my master's degree in adult education and workforce and workplace development with a concentration in HR, human resources.
And what led you to that specific discipline in university? Was it because of your past?
Yeah, it was because they said I couldn't do it. They said, you will never graduate and get a master's. You never had a math class. How are you going to pass a master's level statistic course?
And yet you have.
I never had algebra, trigonometry, geometry, finite math, chemistry. I never had and passed a math class. I had a math class. I never passed one.
And yet here you are today. You've authored the book, which is called Power Forward. You're working, as I said, with at-risk youth and adults and learning and teaching them, rather, the power of education. You are doing some amazing work, and you're doing it at a point where, quite frankly, people are simply just looking to retire. So you have done this yeoman's work.
Peter, they're ignoring what I did.
Yes.
And that's wrong to society. We need to teach our youth how meaningful this is to them and their career. And no one sold education to me as a benefit. No one. Throughout the entire process of education. They sold me basketball, gate receipts, tickets, NBA, whatever. They never had education as a benefit to me on any level. I figured that out on my own.
Education as a benefit. I think that is the major point in all of what we've talked about. The book is called Power Forward. Dean Tolson is the author. Dean, thank you very, very much for being on the program with us. You are definitely a role model to many.
Thank you, and I hope people pick up on what I'm saying and follow the example that I miraculously set for them to achieve, for achievement in their lives.
Dean, thank you very much for taking the time to do this.
Okay, thank you, Peter, for having me on.
Dean Tolson, the former NBA player and author of Power Forward, the book that shares his life both on the court and in the classroom. You can go to our website at thestufffile.com, check out the show number for this program, which is show number 0831, and you'll find the link to Dean's website, plus links to either Amazon.com or Amazon.ca, where you can order his book directly. You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder.
Giving you something to think about. This is Morning Shower Thoughts.
If you discovered a universal solvent that could dissolve anything, what container would you keep it in?
Morning Shower Thoughts from the Stuff File program.
Got something for the mailbag? Drop Peter a line. He'd love to hear from you. Send your email to mailbag@thestuffile.com. And remember, stuff is spelled S-T-U-P-H. That's mailbag@thestuffile.com. Or catch up with him on Twitter or Facebook. There's more Stuff File coming your way in just a few moments.
Hey, how would you like to become a patron of the Stuff File program? It's easy to do. By going to patreon.com and becoming a patron, you help to make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. And if you become a regular patron, as a Patreon reward, I'll share with you an electronic version of my book, Great Conversations, my interviews with two men on the moon and a galaxy of stars. You've heard me say on many occasions about the myriad of celebrities I've had the chance to talk to that are contained in my book, which is published by Bear Manor Media. You've also heard me mention that some of the celebrities in my book, and many others, can be heard on our page at patreon.com. If you've been on the fence about joining Patreon, let me try to pull you over to our side. Join Patreon and claim your copy of Great Conversations, my interviews with two men on the moon and a galaxy of stars. Sign up at patreon.com/The Stuff File program.
This is your safe haven from the hard news of the day. The Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder. It's radio for your happy place.
And still to come in the program, Marc Hartzman from WeirdHistorian.com will be along. And we also have an Idiot of the Day coming your way a little later on. But I've got one more Stuff File news story to share with you right here, right now. When deputies from the Flagler County, Florida Sheriff's Office arrived early in the morning at a suspected drug house in Palm Coast, they were greeted by a message on the doormat. come back with a warrant. I've actually seen a picture of the said doormat, and I will post it on the Stuff File social media. Anyway, the police retreated, got a warrant, and returned. They hit pay dirt. The occupant, 38-year-old Eric Lamb, happened to be on the back patio and was apprehended without trouble. Inside, with their warrant, deputies found alleged meth and drug paraphernalia. In addition to charges related to that, Lamb was charged with violating his probation from prior arrests in both Flagler and Volusia County and was jailed without bail. You know, jails should also have welcome mats. Yeah. Anyway, let's get to our last guest here on this edition of the Stuff All program, shall we? Marc Hartzman, the curator of WeirdHistorian.com, is back with a weird story for the month of July. He joins us via Zoom from New York. And Marc, this story is definitely a real balancing act.
It is, yes. This story is about a man named Clifford Calverley, who on July 1st, 1893, made his second crossing over Niagara River on a wire, a 3/4-inch steel cable, 200 feet above the rushing rapids below.
Why?
Well, this was his second attempt. On October 12, 1892, when he was just 22 years old. He crossed. And at this point, he amazed the crowds. He did it in about 6 minutes, which was the fastest time at that point. He was the 8th person to do it, so this was the fastest by then. He didn't just cross it. He would also, as he went back and forth, he'd go back, once or twice, and he'd lay on the wire. He'd sit in the chair. He would unfold a newspaper to read it. He'd swing himself over the rope and dangle from his toes. So he was really like an amazing daredevil. So he decided he wanted to come back and do it a second time and put on another show. What else could he do to wow the crowds? So he did this, and at this point he was proclaimed by the New York Times to be the champion high wire walker of the world. Probably weren't a whole lot back then, but he was the champion at that time, and he'd been preceded by the great Charles Blondin, who did amazing things. But Calverley was pretty remarkable. So this second go around, he walked across with baskets on his feet, which, if you can visualize that, just to, again, make it a little bit more difficult, as if walking on a 3/4-inch steel cable over 200 feet above the water below isn't difficult enough. And then he brought a little stove out and he cooked meals on the rope. And he also did a night exhibition, which was also pretty unusual. But he would sit there, he could just cook on the wire. Again, pretty amazing. It's not detailed what he cooked specifically, although his predecessor, I just mentioned, Blondin, was known to have cooked omelets on the wire. So again, they could be pretty creative and have some nice culinary adventures up there. It's a pretty amazing thing that he was doing at this time, of course, well, any time. But one thing I love about his particular story is he actually had his head examined, because it seems crazy to even try this thing, right?
Yeah.
So, but he didn't have his head examined by a psychiatrist. It's not exactly what it sounds like. It was by a phrenologist in Toronto, which I think is pretty amusing. Phrenologists, for those who might not know, it was kind of a quack science back then, where they would feel the shape of your head. So they would run their fingers over your head and feel for bumps and ridges in your skull, and then try to map different characteristics based on the shape of your skull. Kind of silly. So this phrenologist did this with Calverley, and he said, a smooth head around the ears and uncommonly well formed around the eyes. He is an intelligent, agile, and courageous young man. Which is, again, that it doesn't seem like it took a doctor to figure those things out. That he was courageous. It seems pretty obvious, and that he was, agile. Seems very clear from what he was demonstrating out on that wire.
Well, we always seem to talk about, the wire walkers that are out there, but there's another set of daredevils that never get any kind of recognition whatsoever. And that is the people who put up the wires.
That's a good point.
I mean, aren't they doing a dangerous job? Yeah. I mean, they seem to be doing a very dangerous job themselves.
Yeah, exactly. And I know that part of the reason they would do it over this Niagara River, the portion of the Niagara River, was because there was a place to put, the equipment needed to secure the wire. But yeah, it is still pretty amazing that they could even do that. That actually reminds me of there's a film Man on Wire.
Yeah.
Came out years ago about the wire walker who walked over the Twin Towers in New York City.
Yes.
And what they went through to put that up is really amazing. Because they also dealt with, first of all, it was completely illegal. I think here they had everyone on board with what was happening. It was a show. They had audiences and everything. But the Twin Towers, that was not permitted. They had to sneak around and figure out a way to get the cable from one tower to another. So yeah, that's a good point. Those are daredevils too.
Absolutely. So I would assume, obviously, that this isn't his first time walking a wire. I'm assuming that this is something he had done in other places for quite some time.
There's not a lot of history about him, but basically what I do know is that he only spent a few months of training while he was in Toronto. And so he had done just a few stunts, I think, before that. But it sounds like there wasn't a whole lot. I mean, just literally just a few months of training is all that was said. So he seemed to, clearly have the skill for it. What's interesting is he didn't make a lot of money from this. It wasn't, he got the fame, but he didn't get much fortune at all. So he ended up kind of walking away from it afterward, walking away from the wire and living a normal life after that. There's really not a lot known about him. He was featured again years later in Life magazine in 1937. And he said he loved to do the stunt once more, to show he still had the courage and the ability, but there's no record of that happening. He eventually passed away a few years after that, age 76 in 1946. So yeah, he did it these few times and kind of just walked away from the scene. I guess, didn't push it. It was a good thing not to press your luck when you're walking across a wire, over Niagara River. So he could enjoy the success and move on.
We all know of stories of several people who have done this. Have you chronicled any of the other stories of other wire walkers that have crossed Niagara?
Not Niagara specifically. I've written a bit about Blondin, who I mentioned earlier, who was quite remarkable. Nick Wallenda most recently did Niagara, and he's a sort of a modern day version of Blondin. He's amazing what he does, but I haven't written about him specifically.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong. All of the Wallendas have done something astonishing.
Yeah, their family goes back generations. Circus performers who do many amazing feats high above the ground. For sure.
And this guy, Clifford, he wasn't a circus performer himself? We don't know anything about him other than some of the feats that he had done?
As far as we know, he was a guy who decided to walk over Niagara, did it twice, and then moved on with his life. It no record of him joining a circus afterward or anything.
Yeah. Well, under the headline of "Been there, done that."
Yeah. I think he took the win and moved on.
Now, was he
didn't want to test it?
Was he actually Canadian?
Yes.
Okay, so it's a very Canadian thing to do. Do it, move on.
Yeah, he was living in Toronto, and I know he's buried in. I think right near it's Clarksburg Union Cemetery, Thornborg Clarksburg Union Cemetery.
Okay.
I believe that's supposed to be near where he was born. But yeah, as far as I know, he was Canadian.
And
yeah, he lived out his life in Ontario.
And I have to ask this question because you have co-written the book with Dan Meyer called "To the Hilt: A Sword Swallower's History of Sword Swallowing," and do you know of any of the people who are in that particular book, or Dan himself, if they've been to a phrenologist?
Well, that's a good question. I'm pretty sure Dan has not. There's no more phrenologists around that I know of, unless they're charging some suckers out there. But you know what? I didn't come across any stories of phrenologists checking out sword swallowers back in like the 1800s. There was a sword swallower he wrote about named Moses Berg, who had one wooden leg and was also a wire walker, more of a slack rope walker, and he would cook pancakes on the rope. So kind of a similar act, but he had one less leg, natural leg, and he could also swallow swords, although I don't think he swallowed the swords on the rope. But that's actually a fun question to see if any phrenologists have studied sword swallowers' head to try to figure out. They probably would come to the same conclusion that, they were courageous.
Well, you can put that one
Enduring.
to, you can put that one to Dan and tell us what his answer will be.
I'm gonna put him on that.
Okay. Marc, thank you once again for taking the time to be on the program with us. Looking forward to what you might have for August.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Marc Hartzman, the curator of WeirdHistorian.com and also the publisher at CuriousPublications.com. He's the author of several books, his most recent one co-authored with Dan Meyer, and it's called To the Hilt, A Sword Swallower's History of Sword Swallowing. You can go to our website at thestufffile.com, check out the show number for this program, which is show number 0831, and you'll find links to Marc's site, plus links to either Amazon.com or Amazon.ca, where you can order his book directly. You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder. And boys and girls, it's that moment you've all been waiting for. It's time now for the Idiot of the Day.
And now it's time for the strange things adults do. This Stuff File presents the Idiot of the Day.
The classic barber shop in Jupiter, Florida called police when two men came in and started destroying the place, yelling, "This is how we do it." By the time officers arrived, the men had fled, leaving at least $10,000 in damage done. The owner said one of the men was a former employee, 35-year-old Dominic Arcamoni. The other is allegedly his 45-year-old brother, Michael. Dominic's beef? He had quit his job, and the owner at Classic had given him a bad recommendation at the new place where he had applied, and he wanted to, quote, right their wrong, unquote. No, the owner of Classic said he gave a good recommendation. It was someone else who had given Dominic a bad review. The Arcamoni brothers turned themselves in the next day. They have been charged with felony burglary of an occupied structure without a weapon and property damage exceeding $10,000. I'm going out on a limb, but I'm guessing he's losing his new barber job too. Now, why, oh why, would a barbershop employee mistakenly trash his former place of business, thinking that would happen without any repercussion? One reason, and one reason only. You're an idiot!
Gee, I'm only a kid, but even I know you're an idiot.
And that's it for this edition of the Stuff File program, number 0831. Hope you enjoyed it. The website is thestufffile.com, and once again, Stuff is spelled S-T-U-P-H, where you'll find information and links on all of our guests by going to the weekly Stuff File page. Just look for the corresponding program number, and once again, that's 0831. Email me at peter@thestufffile.com. You can also find me on Facebook, Spoutable, Mastodon, and Blue Sky as PA Holder. Check us out on patreon.com, where you can become a patron of the program. Hope to see you back here for our next show on the air, online, or as a download. We're coming to you from everywhere, including kdxradio.com, over the air on World FM in New Zealand, WNRHLP-FM in Newport Richey, Florida, KZZHLP-FM in Eureka, California, CKUW-FM in Winnipeg, CFMU in Hamilton, CKLU in Sudbury, Local 107.3 FM in St. John, CHSR in Fredericton, and also streaming on just about any streaming service your little heart desires. That's it. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder, a presentation of Flying Fish Communications. Guests of the Stuff File program stay at their own homes. Trust me, I'm the voice for this program. I know there's no budget for accommodations. I'm reading this on a futon.